Hello, everybody. This is your presentation on advanced punctuation for APA and some of the referencing issues that you're going to need this week as you're putting together your final draft for the Big Bother. The objectives for this particular lecture are to, one, recognize some of the advanced APA systems that we use for punctuation, and also to be reminded of some of the basic punctuations that we use in research writing. So the first punctuation mark that we want to take a look at is the semicolon. Now remember, the semicolon is important for research writing because it indicates a relationship between two complete thoughts. So you can take two ideas that are fairly dependent on one another and connect them with that nice little naked semicolon, like our example here. The bus was late, semicolon, I walked. Remember that fanboys' words don't like to travel with semicolons. They don't like to hang out with them. So whenever you decide to use a conjunctive adverb in the second sentence, don't forget to put a comma behind it. So take a look at this example. She thought he was guilty, however, a jury of his peers did not. Remember, these conjunctive adverbs are words like however, consequently, therefore, nonetheless, his cousin, nevertheless, and of course, moreover. And when we do that, when we include this conjunctive adverb here, we indicate the relationship between the two sentences that are tied together with that sexy little semicolon. The only other time Mr. Semicolon gets to have any fun at all is when you have items in a series that have punctuation within the items. And so what happens there is the comma that normally separates the items in the series, because the items are already all junked up with commas, gets upgraded to a semicolon. Take a look at these movie titles with all these commas in them. Imagine if you're, not a native speaker of English and someone comes up to you and says, "I saw the good, the bad, the ugly, trains, planes, automobiles, and Star Trek: The Next Generation." You have no way of knowing if that's one movie or a whole bunch of them. So Mr. Semicolon comes in here where these items have these punctuation marks inside the items, and it upgrades the commas that separate the items. Honest truth, how much are you going to use this in your professional life? 30 years of writing, I've used it twice. But you do need to know about it because it is an important principle of research writing. So in APA world, Mr. Semicolon has a couple of little things he does. When you have two authors that are pretty much saying the same thing, they've got sort of like with juvenile diabetes, proper nutritional attention is so important. You've got 3 or 4 authors that say that, or 2 specifically that say that. So in the citation, it's going to look like it normally looks. Smith, 2007, page 22, semicolon, the other guy that said this stuff, Jones, his information. And notice that this is cool because I told you the one time you're going to use the semicolon as an upgrade when the items are in a series. Here's an example of it, okay? So it does have some advantages because it shows your reader, hey, these 2 bozo authors thought the same thing. But then it also has disadvantages in that it looks sloppy in the citation. So you kind of have to weigh it, where you place it, how you place it, to make sure it's not, interfering with reader ability to comprehend your document. His cousin, Mr. Colon. Mr. Colon has kind of gotten stripped down. He doesn't do as much as he used to. The first thing we use colons for is to introduce a list. So, for example, in your paper, if you take a look at the sample paper, you'll see that at one point I have a bulleted list. I don't have a problem with you including lists in research papers because frequently that's what we need. So the thing to remember is that a complete thought or sentence must precede the colon. Like here, you must bring the following to class, and then the list of whatever it is that you're dealing with. Here, a sharp pencil, your notes, and an open mind. Colons are used between chapter and verse in Judeo-Christian Bible references. It's also used, of course, in time. Now here's a neat little thing. If it's a capital PM or AM, you're looking at standardized British usage. But if it's a lowercase AM or PM, it's standardized American usage. So make sure in your papers you're using lowercase AM and PM for time indicators. And then, of course, remember from third grade, the opening to a business letter, an official letter that you're sending through email or through snail mail, the colon there suggests instantly that this is a formal document and not a casual or friendly letter. So when you mean business, use a colon, after your salutation in a business letter. The other thing Mr. Colon does is he introduces the long quote in APA. And so let's review the long quote, right? A long quote is one that contains 40 or more words or takes up more than 5 lines on your written page. They should be integrated into paragraphs grammatically. They shouldn't be all standing all off by themselves in the long quote corridor. You should introduce your long quote with a, attributive tag, some sort of "this is where my ideas are coming from" with a complete sentence, followed by that colon. In a minute, we're going to take a look at an example. So you start on a new line, indented 1/2 inch or 5 spaces, same as a paragraph indentation. And they are punctuated and then followed by the citation, which is kind of unusual. And you should not use a long quote at the end of a paragraph. I am of the belief that I don't like you to use more than 3 long quotes because it's just cheating at some point. But I think it's one of those things where 1 or 2 long quotes in any given research paper is probably pushing it. So you want to make sure you check with your instructors, how friendly are they with the long quote. And another important item is to ask if they want their long quotes single-spaced or double-spaced. Some feel that single spacing keeps students from exploiting the length that a long quote takes up in a paper. And then, quite frankly, APA says double space the long quote. So that's the end of that. You should double space your long quotes. But be aware that not all instructors have different levels, of friendliness towards the long quote. Next thing we want to look at is just regular old everyday quotation marks. So I had this student like a million years ago. His name was Jason, and he was the smartest student I ever had. He's currently working in some Washington think tank, making more money than all of us will make in our entire lives. So he's a really special individual. And I was giving this elaborate lesson on quotation marks, and Jason pops up from the back of the room and he says, "Hey, Ms. B," and he's an 8th grader at the time. He says, "It's easy. The punctuation mark always goes to the left of the quotation mark." And I say, "Well, yeah, pretty much, and everywhere but certain APA punctuations." And he sort of dies laughing. But we do use quotation marks for dialogue and creative work, and that's probably the reason you never write dialogue, because you don't know where those quotation marks go. We use it in research, of course. We use it here in America for specialized, snarky terms, things we sort of put in air quotes, and it's a very bad strategy in terms of writing. And then sometimes titles need quotation marks. Sorry, I got interrupted. So what if you decide to be all fancy pants about it? And maybe you want to, you've got a term that you want to use a little bit of paraphrasing as well as a little bit of quotations, particularly if you have a term that's difficult to paraphrase. Remember fluke blows from class? So in my example here, according to Carr, 2011, I decided to tuck his date right there. I was being creative. And then, of course, my introductory comma after my introductory participial phrase. The topic of neo-paganism is not a clear-cut understanding of the problem solution aspect of research. So notice here, I couldn't find another way to say problem solution. So I sucked out that particular phrase and directly quoted it. Also notice here at the end, where's that period? Unlike traditional rules, APA requests that period be put at the end of the borrowing, like a little bottle stopper. Do you remember that? There at the end of the sentence, holding it together so that it will not bleed onto the next sentence. When we're dealing with titles, frequently in research of articles and different things that we're using, those titles do get specially treated with different kinds of punctuation. So our friend Jason, once again, leaned in on this one, and he pointed out that most short things get quotation marks around their titles. And longer things get italics or underlining. And we'll talk about that italics versus underlining thing in a minute. So let's start over here. The things that don't take long to experience. A short poem. Here's my favorite poem of all time. I'm going to recite it for you. It's an Ogden Nash poem called Lasagna. Are you ready? Wouldn't you like to have lasagna any old time the feeling was on ya? That's it, short poem. So that short little poem, the title, Lasagna, gets quotation marks. I think it was Ogden Nash. So a short essay, perhaps something powerful like that Our Barbies Ourselves article that we used for writing assignment number 2. If you have a short chapter, that is, you've taken a piece of a big thing and you've sucked it out, it gets quotation marks. And that goes for other short things that you've sucked out of a bigger whole, like a song from an album title. So you might like that particular song off the album. That particular song gets quotation marks, while its longer version, the entire CD or album or online portfolio, would get the italics or underlining. Things like episodes of TV shows, as well as article titles, that is, articles from journals and other media sources that you've used. Their titles get quotation marks when referring to them in the paper proper. Remember, APA has some strange rules for this stuff. Hang on, I'll go through that in a second. So for longer works, things that take you longer to experience, a movie, a play. Has anyone ever sat through the entire Macbeth? That takes forever. A novel, a video game, interestingly, or a magazine or journal title. When it's the whole thing or a long thing, the title gets italics or underlining. We use italics now for titles of long things. In the past, we used underlining. When you are handwriting a document, you should use underlines in place of italics. But when you are word processing, you should use italics for titles of longer things or entire works. So, quick review. Short thing, piece of the whole, the title gets quotation marks. Long thing, takes a long time to experience, or the entire aspect of something, then it's going to get italics. If it's handwritten, that title is going to get an underline in the handwritten form. So here's where it gets tough with APA, okay? Basically, when the article is freeform, that is, it doesn't belong to a specific online journal, a specific online periodical, it's going to get italics because it stands sort of on its own. It's not a piece of the whole, okay? So that's a little different than sort of normal stuff, right? So if it's a short little title like 2 words, then and it stands alone, it's not part of a bigger whole, it's going to get italics. When it's part of that bigger whole, that is, it's a short piece from a large thing, then you're going to want to put the article title in quotation marks. And notice that we're going by these article titles because we don't know the authors. Important thing, when you don't know the author, the title of whatever it is you're dealing with becomes the author and assumes the author's place in citations. Okay? And if you don't know the author or the publication date, ND is pretty popular, but I prefer the download date so that I know an article existed on the internet at a certain specific time. And then also, it's okay to put section clarifications in your citation if you feel like it'll help the reader. The whole idea with the citation is that you show the reader precisely where you got borrowed information from. Quotes within quotes. Oh boy, I see this abused all the time on BuzzFeed. So if you're reading stuff and you're like, but wait, that's not what Mrs. Brandt said, you've got to recognize that a lot of this garbage that you read out there on sort of daily mass media internet sites is not standardized collegiate English. It's some bozo just like me sitting at home just cranking the stuff out, not really caring too much about the formal strictures of collegiate research writing. So you see it abused, let them abuse it. There's a better way. Here, take a look at how unreadable this little borrowing is. So we have the opening quote. So this whole thing was directly quoted, okay, from the Jones source. Chuck Walter, the Meta Report author, said, remember, so these were Chuck's words. So this is a quote within a quote. The author has directly quoted it, but then there's Chucky's words too. And then they put the single quote around that. And as you can see, boy, we just got all sorts of quotation marks. Much better way to deal with this is to revert all of that who said, who the author of the quote is, into the citation. Look how much better and clearer it is here when we say the actual quote from Chuck Walter was, remember what FEMA wants us to do in emergencies, minimize impact. So who said that? Walter. Where did he say it in? Jones. But you can see this cleans the whole thing up nicely and should avoid the whole, what do I do with the source within a source? The source that's within the other source, use them directly and then just let all of the where I got it from business belong in the citation. So another way around quotes within quotes, okay? So when you've got somebody within another article, and you've got layers of it, don't be afraid to give little explaining phrases in your borrowings, you know, like Dr. Mark Whitehall. Well, he wasn't one of the, you know, he didn't write the article, but I'm going to give him a little, you know, a tag here so my reader knows who he is, an attributive tag, if you will. An expert in how steroids affect the body asserted that. Where did I get that from? Armstrong. So although Marky Boy here wrote the actual, you know, idea, where did I get it from? Armstrong. So that should really help you guys navigate the quotes within quotes problem that exists in the research world. So the other stuff that, you know, punctuation marks that junk up your paper and make it harder for your reader to not miscue or misfire. If you're dealing with a big anagram, all right, like the Center for Disease Control, who isn't these days, right? So if it's inside the paper itself, you simply come after the first mention of the organization with parentheses and show your anagram. From that point on, you may just refer to it as the CDC. If you decide to do that inside a citation, which I think is super clever and cool, you mention the actual organization name, Center for Disease Control, right? And then in brackets, you just put the little happy anagram that you're going to refer to it from there on. So those are your two choices. You've got to mention it inside the paper and give it you know, parentheses behind the actual organization name, or inside the citation where you give the anagram in brackets. So primary sourcing. Primary sourcing, we haven't had a chance to talk about this much. We really at Deltec prefer that you wait till English 122 technical writing, which, quick advertisement, take it. I know it's scary. It's got this humongous paper, but you're good at that now that you've had this class. The stuff you learn in technical writing will help you in your professional development probably more than any class we offer at Deltec. So if you get a chance to take ENG122, do it. Now with primary sourcing is stuff that you know, maybe a personal interview, maybe you're doing a paper on, you know, oxygen levels in firefighters, and your dad's a firefighter, and you might want to interview him, get what he has to say on it. Basically, what you do in this is you want to explain your citation, excuse me, itchy nose, inside the paper itself, right? But when you do that, what you want to do is actually have the phrase personal communication and the date that you did the interview. Now, if you are interested in doing this in one of your sources for your paper, whew, you're really running late on this. I prefer that you don't use them. If you are hardcore, want to use a personal interview or remark from somebody that you know, let me know via email pronto so I can help you sort of guide through that. One quick thing you do need to notice is that primary sourcing, interviews, surveys you've done, whatever the work is that you've done on the research by yourself, that does not get put on the reference page. It only gets this personal communication, happy little citation at the end of it. So primary sourcing, more questions on that, please send me an email and I'll be happy to guide you through it. So here we go, multiple authors. Yeah. If there's one or two authors, we list them every time. Okay. So for instance, here, sorry, another nose itch. Klein and Kent, those two guys said that together in their article. If you have 3 to 5 authors, you list them all the first time, and then you have this nice little abbreviation et al., which means all those other guys, for subsequent listings. All right, so the first time, you've got everybody, Torque, Jones, Dollins, Nesmith. But then after that, it's just Torque and all those other guys. So that should help. If you've got 6 or more authors, and sometimes you'll have as many as like 17 authors, it's crazy. Don't forget that all citations there just have an et al. Smith and all those other guys, all 17 other guys wrote this particular article. So that's how you deal with multiple authors and punctuate them, of course. Notice those little ampersands near for the and in the 2-person author listing, and that and in the last one there. The ampersand makes it a little easier to deal with those. Some things I want you to just leave alone because they erode your ethos. How do you get people to take you seriously? Don't do these things on paper. First of all, the dash. From our work on Me and My Mushroom Tree that the dash is just a filthy little punctuation mark that just dirties up the water. Now, unless you are using him very specifically for the cause and the purpose that dashes are needed for, you want to avoid the dash. He's, I don't know how to say it, casual. He's not something we use a lot in formal academic writing. Sometimes you're going and writing and you just feel this need to sort of like explain something in parentheses, kind of like out the side of your mouth. I'm going to explain this to you, reader. Don't do it in formal research. In formal research, those parentheses belong to citations. And everything you put in parentheses, my argument is that if you put it in parentheses, why not just figure out a way to tell your reader directly what it is you want to sort of put in parentheses. So save parentheses for citations. Don't underline or bold or extra font big stuff that you think is important. You're not emoting. This isn't Facebook. This isn't Instagram. It's not tweet. You're not carrying the emotion along with little punctuation marks and emoticons and underlining. Don't do it. Let your words serve as your weapon. Let those naked, beautiful words on the page be powerful. Definitely avoid emoticons. I once had a paper turned in where every sentence was punctuated at the end with an emoticon with the emotions that I should feel for that. And it's very unprofessional. And the last thing is exclamation points. You're so excited. You're going to put 1,000 exclamation points. No, you're not. All this does is make you sound like an overexcited 7th grade cheerleader, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but in research paper writing, it kind of is. So keep your punctuation marks sort of lean, make them have purpose in the paper. Don't add extra stuff that's not needed that might interfere with readability.